Uh-oh, the audit is next month. Of course, we said most audits should be planned, but what happens if you didn't get the email and now you get that note that says we are auditing you next month? What do you do now? So let's talk about that. I have 4 key areas that I suggest you take a look at. You want to confirm the scope of that audit, inform your stakeholders of the audit, collect your documentation, artifacts, and your evidence based on what the auditor is telling you they're looking at, and of course, look at your scheduling and capacity, because you can't stop your normal day job of delivering services because that audit is coming up. So you have to be able to schedule that around some key dates and times. When you confirm the scope, a couple things that I suggest you ask the audit team. Hey, is this an internal or external audit? Will we have part of our accounting or audit firm here? Is this something that is looking at external laws and regulations, or these internal controls we're looking at? What type of audit are we going through? Are you looking at processes, specific security areas, privacy areas? Is this a technology control audit? That will help you identify the stakeholders that need to be involved and the type of evidence that you need to collect. And this is very important. Most organizations have some type of standard or framework they will use as a basis of the audit, and we'll talk about that here in just a little bit. Of course, the requested documentation and the timeline and the plan for that audit. Next, you determine the appropriate stakeholders and you inform those stakeholders. These might be folks who are either part of the audit or folks you need to talk to gain and collect information from in order for you to provide evidence for that audited area. You want to inform the team being audited, and that's going to be based on the stakeholders you identified when you confirmed the scope a few minutes ago. Risk management may be involved because you want to identify the most relevant and high priority risk scenarios that your organization is up against. Of course, IT management, any unit leaders that might be involved, third parties or suppliers that might be part of that audit or that you need to draw information from in order to provide evidence in that audit. Maybe the legal department to provide any contracts or information you may need for that audit. Regulatory and compliance. And of course, the finance department. There could be many other stakeholders involved, and again, that's going to be based on the confirmation of the scope that you did a few minutes ago. Next comes the big one, right? We start to collect all of our documentation, artifacts, and evidence. So I start with general documentation over here on the left. Of course, it's very important for you to have any information about your IT assets. That might be technical assets, application assets, and so on. You normally have some type of asset management system or configuration management system that might have that. Any technical topologies you might need to identify technologies that might be under the jurisdiction of that audit. Any process or procedure documentation, you can generally find that in a centralized location, hopefully, but if not, you'll have to address every one of the process owners that are involved as a part of the audit. Charters, delegation, and escalation procedures. What this really refers to are any of the governing bodies you have within the IT organization. Your change control board, architecture review board, technology committee, those types of things. And those committees are generally going to have a charter statement which identifies the levels of authority, the types of policies that they're going to create, what delegations they should be providing, and any escalation procedures that need to go to them. Now, it may not always be a governing body in IT. It could be a specific leadership position as well. Collect any contracts that you might have with external or third-party providers, and of course, information artifacts that are going to be applicable to that area being audited. And as we mentioned before, you talk to your IT risk teams to give you information about risk scenarios and the responses. Remember, those responses to the risks to IT are not always in the form of controls or mitigations. There may be approved areas of risk by the organization where you've either chosen to accept that risk, avoid that risk, or maybe transfer that risk through insurance. It's also very important to get information about previous audits. Now, you shouldn't forget about that previous audit once the audit is over, but it might give you information to be able to help you prepare for any weaknesses in your internal controls that were identified during the last audit. It's very important to look at applicable policies. Not just that the policies are updated because that's what the audit's going to do, But those applicable policies are going to be used to identify whether or not your IT organization is following those policies. So you may want to look at information and security and privacy policy, segregation of duties and any authority matrices you might have, purchasing policies, risk management policies. There could be multiple policies you have out there, especially if you have multiple processes in your organization. Every one of your processes may have a policy. And finally, you want to look at your scheduling and capacity. Like I said, most IT organizations aren't sitting around with nothing to do. We have so many demands on our resources that it's hard to add new work. And when we add new projects, we have to prioritize those projects. So we want to make sure that the audit is being synchronized with any current scheduling and capacity issues we might have within IT. We need to get that project or the audit schedule so that we can start to identify the available resources, look at our current demand pipeline because there may be some projects that may have to be postponed, any resource requirements based on the needs of the audit, and of course we need to address any scheduling conflicts with that audit team. Now that we've covered the areas you should look at, let me give you some of my top suggested actions here. Number one,